So you have a situation that's creating anxiety and a person who's vulnerable to anxiety. The same thing happens with depression. If you want an interesting read, there's a book called, I think it's called The Narcissistic Family. And there are a number of case studies in the book where a very intensely religious parent is a feature of what's going wrong inside the family. And I think it's a good look into maybe some of the structure of your question. And that seems to be a fairly prominent feature in about a quarter of the cases that I remember from that book. It's not about religion. It's just something that came up a lot as a thing that created this type of dysfunction in a family. Other things that would do that would be a mentally ill parent or a substance abusing parent or a parent with a personality disorder. But religion seemed to play a fairly prominent role in some of those cases.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. First of all, to David, there's been a couple of movies out called Saints and Soldiers here, and very popular in Salt Lake. And they contain stories of where German Mormon militiamen would save the lives somehow of American Mormon servicemen and whatever. I'm curious about, is there any truth to that? And then secondly, there's a story that's going around about Mormon missionaries being able to leave Nazi Germany, and one in particular where they were trying to get him in the railroad station, and one guy that was supposed to find him got up and started singing one of the Mormon hymns to get all that. Is that just fantasy, or is that it?
Okay, let me go with the first question. The first instances you talked about were a product of something that occurred down at BYU called the Saints at War Project. And I wish I had it at the top of my head, the two gentlemen that were involved in this. They went around to mostly American Mormon veterans of the war, but also German Mormon veterans who were living in the United States and who had a command of English. And basically they were fishing for faith-promoting stories. Okay, I don't have a problem with that, except that I know, especially since this study was funded by Brigham Young University and by the Religious Studies department there, I know that if somebody had said, well, I know my former missionary companion, he was a soldier over there, and he raped a French female or something like that, you know, that wouldn't have made it into the Saints at War Project. Not to say that that happened, okay? But those type of projects are undertaken with a determined end. In other words, you have your determined end to show how being faithful and being strong in your faith and living a good life and reading the scriptures will protect you in all contingencies, whether that be a skiing accident or ravages of wartime. So I don't doubt the individual stories that come up in these books. There's a book, German Saints at War. There's a book, Saints at War. There's the video you talked about, Saints at War. And I quote some of these things from the German Saints at War. They paint the picture of, for example, for the Wehrmacht veterans who were Mormons. The typical story is, I was out on the front lines and I felt a prompting, and I went over here to this side of the trench, and as soon as I got over there, an artillery round fell on this side of the trench and blew everybody up. So therefore, it was the Lord that prompted me to go over there. Well, to that person, it's true, okay? But I never saw a story saying, well, they decided they were going to have a Sunday morning devotional, and they all gathered in this clearing, and an artillery round fell on them and killed them all. Okay, so that's my answer in that regard. Can you prompt me what the second question is again? What was the second thing you asked?
Oh, it's about the end of the war and getting missionaries out.
Okay, the great evacuation, the heroic evacuation of the West German mission, okay? Okay, so here's what happened. First off, during the Czechoslovakian crisis, during what was called the Munich crisis in the fall of 1938, they had what they called the fire drill evacuation. The State Department put out a bulletin when Hitler was meeting with Neville Chamberlain and the French Prime Minister. The Russians wouldn't have anything to do with it because they knew that we were going to appease Hitler, so they wouldn't send anybody. But while this was going on, the State Department put out an all-points bulletin. All Americans should be careful of traveling in Europe. J. Reuben Clark, who had his fingers on the button with his former State Department colleagues, he was a former Undersecretary of State during the Coolidge administration, he pushed the button and everybody left, okay? And then when they came back 3 weeks later, the German saints made fun of them because you didn't need to leave. This was a great triumph for Germany. Hitler won these concessions from Chamberlain. Chamberlain went back and said there will be peace in our time and all this kind of stuff. But it was a great victory for patriotic Germans at that time. And they made fun of the American missionaries, said you didn't have to leave. During that time, they found out that in these German branches, some women had prepared and blessed and passed the sacrament, and all kinds of terrible things had gone on. So they had to send missionaries back, okay, to straighten this stuff out. Well, anyway, so then rolls around the last week of August, 1939. And this shocking event to the left wing of the political left in every Western country comes up, and it's the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And it's the peace treaty between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. Oh boy, the left didn't like that because their heroes, Stalin, had made an alliance with the devil. But to J. Reuben Clark, and I don't have a whole lot of regard for this man in certain circumstances, but he knew what was going on. And he said this can mean only one thing. This means war. This means that exactly what happened, that the Germans were going to invade Poland from the west. 3 weeks later, the Russians were going to invade Poland from the east, and they were going to carve it up. And so he pushed the button again. And okay, all missionaries scrambled and leave. Well, the East German missions, it was now then called the East German Mission. They changed its name in 1938 from the German-Austrian Mission. They all, they were all practiced up. They got on the trains and they left, and they went up to the Netherlands. They went and all of this. So anyway, it went smoothly for them. Wasn't quite so successful in the West, because I believe the staging area and the plan was to go through Denmark. Okay. Problem is that the Danes learned a lesson themselves in World War I, when their country was flooded with refugees and they didn't have the ability to care for them. So the Danes closed their border. Unless you had money, and unless you had an onward ticket, then you could get through. And later, a week later, the Danes closed the border completely because they didn't want to repeat what happened in World War I. Well, guess whose plans, a monkey wrench was thrown into the plans of the missionaries from the West German mission. All kinds of chaos went on. Now, these missionaries had known that there was a rule in Germany that you could not take any more than 10 marks out of the country. No more than 10 Reichsmarks, because Germany didn't want its currency, which was backed by a gold standard, in order to leave. So they went in and made last-minute purchases of trinkets. The Germans made wonderful cameras. The missionaries were writing home, asking Richard Pohl, who had a long teaching career afterwards, got all these letters of him writing his parents home, send me money for a German camera. Well, anyway, they spent all their spending money, so they had $10 in their 10 marks in their pocket or less, and they were supposed to get their steamship tickets once they got to their host country, once they got to Denmark. Well, they couldn't show that they had a forwarding ticket. Big chaos. So you had a 3 or 4 day period where the missionaries dripped through, where they sent money. The mission president in Denmark, he sent money to the missionaries. He sent tickets. He knew exactly what was going on. But there's a real penchant for control in Mormonism, and especially in the missions. If you don't have your fingers on wherever a missionary is at all times, you feel pretty powerless. So eventually what happened is all these guys got through. They all got through. Everything was fine. The fact is they didn't really need to leave Nazi Germany at the time, because the United States didn't come into the war for 2 years and 2 months. And they would not have been in any great danger. They could have gone out orderly. They could have gone back to their post. They could have consolidated at the mission home in Frankfurt in West Germany and gone out orderly there, and made arrangements through the German government to leave. And it would have happened. But instead, what came out of it became another opportunity for faith-promoting scholarship. Okay, David F. Boone at Brigham Young University wrote a master's thesis and 2 published scholarly articles on this great German evacuation. And you will find also your share of faith-promoting books. Mine Angels Roundabout. And I forgot the name of the author off the top of my head. But again, she went ahead. She's a lady in Idaho that in the 80s she went ahead and made it her point to interview as many of these West German missionaries as possible, and to produce a book where the end was predetermined, that it was going to be a faith-promoting book and it was going to tell about all the miracles. So she got hold of local missionaries in Utah, missionaries as far away as Australia and Israel, much older men by this time. And so tell me your faith-promoting experiences with regard to the evacuation of the West German mission. Well, that's what you got. So yes, there was a situation where one elder was dispatched back into Germany with a wad of cash in his pocket to find these groups of missionaries. And these missionaries were in a train station, the Bahnhofs, the train stations there were just chaos at the time. And so there's a bunch of group of missionaries that they're singing Come, Come Ye Saints or some other hymn. And so over the din of the roar, the missionary with the cash hears this and goes and finds them and buys them tickets and they get out of town. So is it total baloney? No. They probably were singing. And there were no stories in here about angels that came down. Okay? But they're all faith-promoting, it's predetermined scholarship. Okay? Every individual incident, such as every individual incident at the Saints at War, I would not doubt the historical veracity of it. But you know the method, the method that was employed. As I told you guys at this microphone yesterday, I went into researching the Mormons in Nazi Germany with an open mind, because I had an LDS child that was looking for stories about persecuted Mormons in a concentration camp. And if I'd have found them, I'd have written them. And if it would have come out and it would have been a book that didn't have a red cover and the Salt Lake Temple and swastika on a cover, and instead would have been something that would be on sale at Deseret Book and the BYU bookstore, because that's where the chips fell, and you wouldn't be having me here. I'd be a fair Mormon, okay? But I'm going to tell the story that I found. These other authors, I don't believe, went into it with an open agenda. They came in with a predetermined agenda.
Thank you. One last question for Hans. Can you touch on the compensation that's given to 70s and even part of the 15? We've heard rumors that when you're called to be an apostle, you get a big lump sum of money to cover your debts, stuff like that. And would you just touch on that?
Hans, also, if you could also in your answer disclose anything about what you're required to sign in terms of a non-disclosure.
The only thing I know is that I didn't get any money. They paid for airplane tickets. Sometime I get some money for, I had some dinners when I was out and traveling. And that's it. I know that the first quorum of the 70 are paid. They don't call it salary, they call it
It's reimbursement.
Wait a minute, my head is here.
Living allowance?
Thank you, living allowance. And that means you can live quite well. It's not funny. Take your tithing money. Well, let's put it this way. This is the way they probably would tell you that if I was not on this calling, I had a much more valuable job outside the church that would give even more money. So I'm worth more, so this is a sacrifice for me to be here. So now the 12, I don't know, but I don't think they look thin. They have nice cars and yeah. So I know they have the same thing with allowance. And I don't think they even pay tax for it. So, well, that's all I know. So if you are in the second quorum, third quorum, fifth quorum, and so on, you're not being paid, but you will be supported. But this, I mean, the second quorum is general authority. They also got allowance, if I remember right. And of course, they also write books, you know, or sometimes they don't, but someone else do when they sign them. They got some royalties from that. Before they were always sitting in the church businesses, companies, but I think that really was not a good idea because there were more doctors than businessmen, some of them, and I think they stopped that. And the second question you had was if I was what?
I'm just interested to know how widely circulated among general authorities non-disclosure agreements are, where they require that, you know, there's a legal penalty if you're disclosing information about finances or operations of the church.
The only thing I can remember now is that it's 15 years ago, you know, so we have to promise in front of the first presidency, everybody was new on the special meeting with the right hand in the square, and promise that we will not use church materials to not be honest with them. And we also promised that we will give everything back because this belongs to the church. And there were some information that we were told not to talk about. But more, I guess, because they don't want the public relation to work too hard. I just like Lepake talked to us, and when we were trained, that he said, I have stopped to write my diaries, and I wish everybody write diaries. And he was so upset because so many historians that looking for history used diaries from members, and probably they wrote down what they thought and not what the church taught. So he was upset. He didn't say we not have to write diaries, but he said, I don't do it, and well, we follow the leaders, I guess. And one interesting thing, if we talk about money, is I served when Hinckley was the prophet or the president, and they decided the church needed more money, or the corporation needs more money, so they said we would take missionaries from the poor countries, and we will send them to Canada and US, because the more rich people there, so we will get more tithing if we will have missionaries there and more converts. So money talks, it does, and of course, if you look at it, it's not that bad really, because you need a lot of temples and church buildings and missionary offices, and it costs a lot. So, and of course, the poor country don't contribute any money; they just suck the money from the church. So.
For Earl. Earl, I've been curious about your wife as far as in this journey you took towards the culmination of the book. Took many years, and did she stay real active for a long time? Is she still?
She's still active. She's
Intense
still
church.
active.
Okay, that's what I wanted.
She's still active, and I have 2 sons. They each have they're each married and have 2 children. They're all active. I'm the only black sheep.
Fun, isn't it?
Sue, behind you.
I'm Dr. Craig Wilkinson, an ex-Mormon here in Salt Lake. And being an academician, I always have looked at the history, and we see all these people that are getting excommunicated for talking about true history. And you see the geneticists talking about the Indians and what the true source of the Indians is. And then you watch BYU and the apologies that come up. And my question is, there's no academic freedom at BYU. Obviously, because if you do anything against what their idea of what the truth is, you're going to get excommunicated. And my question is, how come they don't lose their accreditation? The BYU doesn't just lose their accreditation from whoever does that accrediting, I'm not sure, but it's obviously a national association, must accreditate colleges. And that's for anybody in the panel.
What's that? I know there was a period of time about 10 years ago when they were technically threatened that they would lose their accreditation, but I don't remember what the issue was. Whatever they were pressured about, they cleaned up, I guess. Yeah.
I would say that, and I'm no expert on this, I'm just giving you another person's opinion. There's a lot of money and influence. BYU, other than the University of Phoenix, is the largest private school in terms of enrollment in the United States. I hate to say it because it casts some aspersion on the values and the credibility of the accrediting agencies. But if you're going to threaten Biola College with something because you can't, they don't let their undergraduates practice religious freedom as we see it, there's not going to be as much blowback as not accrediting BYU for the fact that an undergraduate who goes there as a Mormon and has a faith experience and becomes an evangelical Christian gets kicked out. He gets kicked out of his apartment, and many times his transcripts are placed on hold pending church discipline. There's just too much influence that BYU and the LDS Church has, and that's just my venture, and I would love to be wrong about that.
Stephanie, do you have any thoughts about the change with 3 women being put on some of the priesthood executive councils recently?
I think Mormon people are used to subsisting on breadcrumbs and saying that that's equality. And I think, sometimes I have to take like my cynical helmet off. I think the purpose of that is the church is moving towards a message regarding gender relations of complementarianism, and it's something they stole from evangelical Christianity, where men and women are of course equal, absolutely equal in every way. They just have very different roles. And that's the message that they're pushing now, because the old message, which was much more openly sexist, wasn't working. And I think it wasn't working even for faithful Mormon people. And so I talked about earlier, you don't deal with the nuisance, but like when lots of people start to have a problem with the language about women in the church, you do something. And like the church does with most of its other ideas, they found something that worked in another religion and did Mormon voodoo on it and made it their own. And now that idea is that men and women are equal but have different roles, and then people would answer back and say, well, what are their roles? They don't have anything. And so now they've handed women these positions in leadership opportunities, and now they can say, look, we have given them equal roles, but they're very different, and now we don't have to extend them priesthood, now we don't have to deal with all of those other issues, and it's their token answer, and it's their breadcrumb. And if you are trying to stay in the church and you are desperate for anything to be sustaining, you might be willing to take that. And from what I've seen, yeah, they're okay with it somehow. But I'm glad that it happened. I mean, I guess any step is good, but it's not true equality, but it's working, I guess. So did that answer your question? Thanks.
I've noticed a lot of laughter and happiness in this group. Now, could any of you compare other groups of Mormons that get together for whatever reason, and what's the general atmosphere?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. So other groups of Mormons in general, ex-Mormons, post-Mormons, I'm not, are you asking?
Mormons happy group.
My family is pretty happy that's Mormon. I think, so you're asking about people who are staying in the church, right?
Yeah, and that they have.
I think there's happiness. I mean, obviously there's problems. I have problems too. I'm not always happy. But I'd say my family that I know that's LDS, they seem happy.
Yeah, I think our own experience when we really have small children, and I was always sitting on the stand, and I think we were very happy when the church ended. And we made it for 3 hours. You know. But of course, then you, as a believer, you're really happy when you see your kid being baptized or being blessed, and when you follow your son or your daughter to the temple, believing, you kind of quite happy. And but if you go back and look at the more daily way to look, you can just walk into the high priest group, and if someone had a heart attack, they wouldn't find who it was.